Florida State loses a commitment, and more flips are coming to and from Florida State.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today is all about recruiting and a little bit of information again on Malzahn, how that might impact recruiting. I had a full show on him on Sunday. Please check that out. There's a lot of information about the man's background. He will impact this 2025 Florida State recruiting class. But first off, I just want to give a rundown here. Number one, there's going to be a lot of discussion about flips to and from Florida State. There's also going to be some information about the specific players, their traits, a little film breakdown. But first, Peyton Joseph has decommitted from Florida State. He's going to go to Georgia Tech. We saw this coming. I brought this up multiple times over the last few weeks. That's a big loss. Houston County is a good football program that he's from. He's a kid that's a really good athlete in the trenches, probably an interior guy, was originally committed to Florida, commits to Florida State, and now he's at Georgia Tech. After the way Georgia Tech ran on Georgia this past weekend, I don't blame him. Plus, they actually have an offensive line coach, a really good one. So it's not really shocking from that perspective. But again, he's a top 250 kind of guy, in my opinion, from a talent perspective. Looking at his rankings, this is not a kid that Florida State could afford to lose. They only have two offensive linemen committed right now, Solomon Thomas and Mario Nash Jr., both very, very good players. But they needed a five-man class, and they've lost two. Pierre Lewis committed to Florida. Now Peyton is going to Georgia Tech. For the sake of argument, for those of you that are watching on YouTube, I'm going to present here and share my screen, and I'll walk it through the overview, if you will, with him as a football player for Florida State and now for Georgia Tech. So the rankings are pretty straightforward with him. Really good football player. On3 had him as a 4-star, 210th player. 247 as a 4-star, 248th player. ESPN, 162nd player, 4-star. Rivals had him as a 4-star, but outside their 250. All of these programs had some, or services had something in common, and that's that he's a 4-star. When you have that many, it puts it into a pretty good category that he can play. As for what Florida State can really do about it, there's not much when you don't have an offensive line coach in the fold right now. Offensive line is a position where prospects bond. They want to be around the O-line coach, etc. But again, Florida State doesn't have one. Assistant O-line coach is still present. Malzahn might be able to help a little bit, but the way these background checks work and trying to get coaches in, you're not really going to announce a lot of guys until afterwards. The Malzahn situation is a little bit rare, but they might have already run a background check on him weeks. I don't know. But I would imagine that the state of Florida, their background checks like anything else, 2-3 weeks. Some of these coaches are still coaching other places. So even if it's done, most of that stuff is going to be after National Signing Day, which is Wednesday, December 4th. So enough on Joseph. Florida State obviously lost a good football player, but good luck to him at Georgia Tech. Next up is the most important thing. Again, two kids are committed, Mario Nash, Solomon Thomas. You have to keep both. It looks like they're going to keep Nash. He's the young man out of Kemper County in the state of Mississippi. I think he can be a left tackle. If he comes to Florida State, he might even start next year. Do I want to see that? Not really. But as I was telling Spencer McLaughlin, it's going to be on his Locked On College Football show. Florida State might be in a really bad spot next year for offensive line, too. Some of these kids that they do sign on the offensive line and the portal are going to have to play right away. That's not ideal. You want pretty much every single, even a 5-star for the most part, offensive line recruit to redshirt. It is not the same, but that's the spot they're in. The worst case scenario is to not have options. And that's why Nash and Solomon Thomas are important. Solomon Thomas, we'll see. I don't know if he's going to sign. I'm not sure he's 100% positive, reading the articles, reading the intel, nobody's 100% sure, which means Solomon Thomas probably still in decision mode too. I honestly wouldn't be shocked. I don't have any intel on this either. If Solomon didn't sign with anyone on Wednesday, maybe put it off another day or so. It's a big decision, and I would respect that. He's a kid that looks at things from a broad view. From being around him several times, I don't think that's going to change. He's pretty grounded, and good for him for doing so. Mario, same kind of deal. Very humble young man, blue collar, good family. I think he wants to make the best decision for him. He knows he's got a chance to play early at Florida State. He really likes the school, and he's had a good time on his visits. We'll see. I like their chances of signing him, but again, I'm sure the Wolves are coming after him. You know what I mean? Like, he's going to have options. It's hard to find offensive tackle recruits. You're going to do everything you can to get the best players into your program, especially at spots that, quite honestly, the portal doesn't do a very good job at presenting, because O-line is really hard, especially tackle, to get. So I'm sure he has some offers. We'll see how that goes. But right now, I think Nash will end up signing with the Seminoles. Before I move on and talking about a long list of recruits, just an overall theme here. Change. There's going to be some kids flip from Florida State, and there's going to be some kids coming in. I think there's going to be a little more of the latter, but it's not a lock. There are several kids, again, they don't know who their position coaches are necessarily going to be, even if they haven't been fired from Florida State. They still don't know the coordinator on either side of the ball, except for Gus. I mean, he's going to be more of like, I think, this play caller. Just calling him a coordinator is not the important thing. He may be the OC, but he's going to be more of a guy that's going to be operational. How much contact he's going to have with them and all that, I don't know. He's an older guy, really personable and charismatic, but I'm not sure that's going to help a lot with recruiting. Defensive side, I don't know who they're going to hire. I have tried not to follow it too closely because I want to wait till after signing day. I know it's probably not going to happen before. To get into that, let's get through this week, because we got recruiting's going to be nuts all week, and the portal is already popping off too. Even one of Georgia's corners, starting corner, entered the portal. That is bizarre. So I'm expecting a lot of fireworks with that as well. When we come back, I'm going to start going down the list, talking about the players that visited for the Florida game, talking about the players they have a chance at, why they're impactful. We'll do a little film breakdown. That is next here on Locked On Seminoles. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the National Football League all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Florida State is literally, again, in the midst of trying to get kids to come in. They had several players on campus, unofficial, official. I'm just going to kind of go through some of them. Some of the names you may know, and some, quite honestly, I had to research, did some film review, went through it. It was pretty fun. I think Florida State did a pretty nice job on one kid in particular, and that's the player I want to start with, Damon June. I hope I'm saying that right, but Damon June, running back, committed to North Carolina. Obviously, Mac Brown just got ousted at UNC. One of the legacies in college football's coaching fraternity is no longer in Chapel Hill as the head man. I'm sure there are other recruits. I wouldn't be surprised if Florida State was trying to get some others. But North Carolina's class falling apart. It wasn't very good anyway. This kid's 5'10", 225, somewhere in that range. He's listed 5'11". I'll guess he's 5'10". That's a running back that will punch you in the mouth. He's got some power. He makes one quick move right or left, and it's downhill. And he's got deceptive speed through the hole. He's not like a burner on the second level. He doesn't have that open field speed like a track kid. But the first 5 yards, he's not much fun. Not much fun at all. He kind of reminds me of some of the running backs, quite honestly, that Florida State would have had under Bowden. They always had like one bigger back on the roster that wasn't fun on short yardage. You're making a business decision. June fits that mold. And from a recent comparison, one they got on the roster right now, Cam Davis. Cam, I don't think, is anywhere near healthy. We haven't seen the best of him yet, but Cam Davis, similar build. He's 5'10", 5'11", 220. This kid's almost identical. So powerful running back, has the ability to hit the hole and get quick yardage. He was used a lot, kind of like at a triple option kind of fit at his high school at Jacksonville High. I'm not sure how they will use him at Florida State with Malzahn, but he fits what they did with R.J. Harvey, who just scored 22 touchdowns at UCF this year. Being a primary back, downhill, inside zone, he would fit that to a T. So that would be a really good addition. Florida State feels like the visit went good. We'll see what happens, but I think it would be a really nice addition to get a player. And he's underrated. He's a 3-star kid. I was surprised by that. I don't know why he was ranked where he was, to be completely honest with you. I could put up his rankings and stuff here on the screen, and I'll go over them. But I was a little bit surprised with where he was ranked. So here's DeMont June. Now let's get him all the way on the screen. These are the numbers for him for those of you that don't see the screen. But he's a 3-star consensus by On3, 247, ESPN, and Rivals. His highest ranking as a running back was by Rivals as the 41st guy. He's not from a major metropolitan area, although Jacksonville's a decent-sized town. I don't really know why he didn't have a higher ranking. To be honest, after watching this film, I think he's pretty good. But North Carolina got him, probably got him early. He didn't get a ton of offers after that. Florida State would be an interesting guy. If he comes into the fold, I think that he would be a welcome addition. Inside, outside running back. So that's DeMont June. Also, there's a couple other players here that I think are pretty interesting that they brought in. So let's just go down the list a little bit quicker here. Number one, Jesse Harrell. He's from Tampa Gaither. It's an area Florida State needs to recruit better anyway. Defensive end, Lord only knows they need more defensive ends. A very twitchy kid. They like where they stand. I think he's the most likely commit of the following players that I'm going through. I think that he's a kid that might even commit before signing day. Who knows? The timing of these are kind of iffy, but he's a guy that was committed to LSU. He's backed off of that. I expect that to happen very soon. Another kid, just sticking with defensive end. This one's more interesting. Tylon Lee. He plays in Pensacola. He's a kid that's been recruited by a ton of programs, committed to Ole Miss right now, but he was back on campus. Florida State should have a pretty good shot here, but Ole Miss obviously had a better season than Florida State by a mile. So can they flip him? This will be a signing day deal, in my opinion. Long, athletic. I think he's one of the top 10, 15 players in the state of Florida this year. Would be a huge get for Florida State. I think that the Noles would do well not only to get him because he's such a good player, they also need to do an even better job of recruiting the Panhandle, Pensacola in particular. This would be a nice way to do that. Next up, this is one that I'm not going to have a ton of info on. He's a JUCO kid, Tywin Coleman. He's a JUCO kid from Mississippi, but you need D tackles in every class. Florida State doesn't have enough talent there, even with Kevin Wynn, and I'll talk about him in a moment. They need another guy. He's 280-something, 6'3", 6'4". He's got a lot of guys coming after him, in particular Mississippi State. Mississippi State has always lived off the in-state JUCOs. They'll go to Kansas, they'll go to Texas, etc., because they don't do as well with the high school kids. So they've probably been on him longer, is my guess. I don't know how that's going to go, but Florida State thinks they got a pretty good shot. We'll see how that one goes. Next, especially with the coach just getting fired there at West Virginia, Tariq Mallory, wide receiver, plays in Connecticut at a prep school, fits the profile with not Malzahn, but he a little bit. He likes some bigger receivers, but more Norvell, big receiver, 6'4", 6'5", 180-something, very smooth. I really enjoyed his tape. I just don't know how to grade him because the competition was awful. Most of the kids he's going against can't remotely cover him. So fluid, can really run, kind of like Kentron, somebody like Deuce Spann. Just look at him on the hoop. You're like, okay, there's something to work with here. But how does he adjust to the college life? How does he adjust to route running? All those little things. Florida State's got to figure out the receivers situation. They've got to figure out their offense in general. A lot of questions, but West Virginia just fired their coach. That makes it even harder for them, too. So that kid's got an interesting decision to make. Again, his name is Tariq Mallory. So next up, just get this out of the way. Myron Charles didn't show up. Justice Terry didn't show up. Kellen Wiley, the linebacker, out of Armwood High School didn't show up. That's very unfortunate. They could have used all those kids on campus this past weekend. Solomon Thomas, that's a really good player. Somebody mentioned a little bit ago that's committed to the Noles. We're still waiting to hear on him. I don't have anything specific. I know more people are going to ask. I'm just going to keep bringing his name up. I really don't know what's going to happen with him. Florida is the team to watch there, in my opinion. They're trending with a whole bunch of kids. They're spending ridiculous amounts of NIL right now. They're going to finish stronger than any team in the country because of their NIL. They didn't use the buyout on Billy. They used the money on recruits and the portal coming up. So do not be shocked if that's a flip, but it's not out of the question he stays with Florida State either. I've heard both sides of that argument, and even the people on the Florida side don't know from what I've been told. Take it for what it's worth. Chroma, the running back out of Lee County in Georgia, he did an unofficial. I don't know if he's going to end up in Florida State. I still don't see it. My guess is Georgia, but he's a kid that has been, even when I talk to him face-to-face, been really hard to read. Probably the hardest of all the kids this year. He just doesn't know where he wants to go. Signing day's here, brother. I hope you pick the right school for you wherever it is. Florida State's still in the mix, but, it's hard to say. That is a hard-charging running back, one of the best in the country. He breaks tackles as well as anyone that I've seen in the last couple of years, and he's an excellent receiver out of the backfield, even catches the ball well over his shoulder. I've seen him live do that several times. Really, really good football player, and a really nice young man, too. Good luck to Chroma no matter where he signs. Next up, this is where it gets kind of funky. If you look at the list, there are so many other kids that you're trying to get in on and you're flip. One that I wouldn't have guessed when I first saw it, that I would like the young man's film, Sean, and I may be mispronouncing his name, Sean Porrette. He's out of the greater Atlanta area. He's a basketball player. He plays D-line. Very athletic laterally, just needs to add weight. Now, I'm not saying he's a complete project because of the weight, but he's not completely filled out either. So he's going to be a kid that needs the redshirt. He's not a kid that's going to play next year, but the athleticism is there. Again, he's committed to USF, so good for their staff for figuring it out early. Hey, this kid can play, but he's a kid, redshirt. Maybe he plays a little as a redshirt freshman, but his redshirt sophomore, I think, is more likely. Again, basketball player, good feet. You'll find a spot for him. I like him a lot. Florida State had him on campus. The visit went well. I would expect Florida State to get him. But again, who's the O-line coach? How do you handle that? I don't know. I've been thinking about how to even define that as this show goes on before I brought up Sean. That's really hard to me because, again, O-lineman bond, they're a little more tighter group, and it's all symmetrical based on the head coach and the O-line coach keeping everything together. Well, by the way, we don't have an O-line coach right now. So that's hard. I don't know if they've been told who it's going to be, even if it's not official. Maybe Florida State knows, and they've told some of these kids. That's possible. But my guess is it's still not done yet. I don't know. We'll find out. Next up, looking at the list overall, I know a lot of people are going to ask about this because Malzahn's coming, and I'll probably mention this in about every Locked On Seminoles podcast. I have zero intel on which recruits will flip from UCF or which players will transfer. There might be one or two from each group. I have no idea. That kind of information, in my experience, will happen in an instant. It won't be drawn out, and that's just the way it is. It's an awkward scenario, but sometimes players follow coaches. It happens. How many I want to follow Gus, I couldn't tell you. Their recruiting class is not in any way stellar, but they have good recruits in that class. Maybe one does, maybe one doesn't. For instance, Javon Boggs, wide receiver out of Cocoa, really good player, committed to UCF. Florida State wouldn't turn him down, I don't think, but to my knowledge of late, they weren't pursuing him. NIL was a big thing with him, and UCF put a lot of money into him. I assume Florida State's not going to do that, or they would have already. Maybe that changed, but that's my guess. We'll find out. There could be other kids, and I'm not going to go down their list of recruits or whatever. I'm not going to disrespect them. Allow it to play out. If somebody signs with Florida State from the UCF class, wouldn't shock me. But again, I do not have any intel on that. I'm not going to lie to anybody. As far as other commitments and other players, there will be other kids on Florida State's current group that I think could flip. Going to talk a little bit about that and also how this class is going to fill out compared to some of the other programs that Florida State normally competes with? That's next here at Locked On Seminoles. All right. Have you downloaded the Gametime app yet? Gametime allows you to go to concerts, to plays, to movie theaters, to baseball games, basketball games, football games, whatever you want, and get great pricing. It's also very convenient because you just download the app on your phone, click on a seat, and you can see the view right there from your phone. And you can go to a Florida State game or anything else and have a pretty good time without all the hassle going through it. Here's something cool that I like about the app. Toggle the all-inclusive pricing. If you do that, there's a simple toggle switch. You set it up, you get the price up front, and you don't get some weird price that you're not understanding at the end, like you do with a lot of things online, all these extra surcharges. You can set that up right there in the Gametime app. They also have something called Gametime Picks. Filters out all the fluff. So if you're just looking for a deal in general, they'll have stuff for you in your area to check out. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime Picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Will Florida State keep all of its commitments based on who's committed now that Peyton Joseph has decided to go to Georgia Tech? I'm going no. But which one or ones will it be? That's why recruiting's fascinating. Redmond, the safety / corner from South Florida, is a great example. Good football player, very versatile. I like him, but so does Mississippi State, and so do other programs. Is it possible that he flips? I could see it. I like Florida State's chances a little better there than I would in some other spots like O-line, because you know who your coach is, and it's somebody that's been in South Florida, has a rep, and Sertan, former NFL player. If I had to guess, I'll pick the Noles. But that's not a lock. Just in general, when you look at the Florida State class, it's tough. It's really tough. Because if you think about the recruits that are committed to the Noles, they have to look at their longevity, not only to get into college degree and like who their specific coach is, but there's so much change, who the other coaches are, who the other recruits are, and all this to be happening within 2 weeks or so of National Signing Day. It's got to be weird. So let me give you an example here. Gregory Zay Thomas, another South Florida kid, American heritage, very familiar with Sertan. That's where he was the head coach at one point. I don't think you're going to lose a kid like that, and I don't think he's really thinking about it, but he's the exception, not the rule. On the other side, you got a kid like Chase Lofton, who's at Millard South, just outside Omaha, Nebraska. That's your flex tight end commitment. While Kevin Sperry and him are friends and all that, the situation at Florida State with the offensive coordinator changing, he's not from the local area. I guarantee you Nebraska would take him among others. You know, if he wanted to go to Iowa State or Kansas State or something like that, they would probably all take him. I think you're looking at a scenario where it's just going to be a signing day deal. I wouldn't be shocked one way or the other. Out of region recruits is harder. Another example here. If you want to look at like the kicker, Bruno Roos or Rice, I'm not sure how you pronounce this young man's name. My apologies. The kicker from Venice, he committed a few weeks ago. It's different for a kicker. While your special teams coach might change, kickers don't even do a lot in practice. Half the time they're goofing around playing games because they just don't want to wear out their leg. They'll kick a little, but that's it. The difference between that and like an offensive lineman is massive. So with all the kids that have already committed to the Noles, it's a different story for each one. Don't be shocked with anything that happens. It's very possible that Florida State adds some guys, but they could lose guys too. You just never know. Now, you're probably hearing, if you follow recruiting like I do, a lot of stuff about UF and other programs. So I'm going to just talk about that to finish up the show. Florida is dumping a ton of money into their program right now for recruiting purposes, as I mentioned earlier. I've even heard that Jamie French is in play. I've heard Dallas Wilson is in play. I've heard all these different guys, and again, Solomon Thomas definitely is in play. Florida's going to close faster than anybody. Is that a concern for Florida State? Of course, you don't want your competition to get talent. Two things on that. Hats off to them for spending money on it. They should. But at the same time, Billy Napier is still their head coach, and he's the guy that can't even get the right number of players on the field in critical special team situations. For years, 3 years in a row, he's had just disastrous games at home or on the road. I will say this for Florida State and every other program. Unless you have a top 10 coach, recruiting's great. It's bottom line. Don't get me wrong. But to be where Florida and Florida State want to win, it's not one or the other. It's both. They both have national title aspirations. And the longer Napier is in Gainesville, the better it is for Florida State. He's a nice guy. I've heard good things about him in that regard. Players really, really like him. Fantastic. That's great. You're not winning a title ever with Billy Napier, even with DJ Lagway. I still expect him to get fired next year or the year after. And it could be even better for Florida State if he sticks around. Why? Because if he sticks around, they're going to be an 8-9 win team. And it's hard to fire that guy. He can 8 or 9 wins. Who cares? Eventually that will get stale. He's always going to be the same coach because at this point in his career, he is who he is. You're not winning a national title there, and that'll be a waste of Lagway. They'll have him for 2 more years. He'll head to the NFL. That's my prediction. Some other news. Miami's still a program. They got most of their class done early. Do not be surprised if they add somebody late. They've got a ton of NIL. I think that LSU is a very interesting program. Like Harold Perkins, by the way, just jumped in the portal. That's wild. They might sneak in and get somebody. They're still recruiting Solomon Thomas. It's not out of the question. I know Sonny Shipp, who's followed LSU recruiting forever and is dialed in there, thinks they got a legit shot. I'm not as sure, but that's a possibility. Also look for Georgia to get somebody on signing day in general because they usually do. Other than that, there's going to be a flip or two that you're like, where did that come from? With all the NIL money that is involved, you're going to see kids that honestly didn't want to pick a school, but they thought it was best for them and their family just based on the offer being so ridiculous. At some point, it's a lot of money. I get it. We're in that era. I don't particularly like it myself because it makes it impossible to get team continuity. And I think that's why we have so much fluctuation, not just year to year, but week to week in college football. But handling NIL in your locker room is going to be a big part of recruiting and the transfer portal, which tomorrow's show is going to be about, by the way. Transfer portal tomorrow because there's a list of kids already in, and I'm like, holy cow. There's some stories about some other teams trying to sneak in and get players off other rosters. Going to go over that tomorrow on Locked On Seminoles. But once again, thank you for checking out Locked On Seminoles and making it your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. If you would, please hit that like button and that notification bell. And if you have not already, hit that subscription as well and share this podcast so I can get in front of more Noles fans. I would appreciate that. Everybody have a good one. I will see you tomorrow. If you want to check me out on X, FB Scout _4. Take care.